Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Mary Jane Orr. I'm the general manager for, so many things to hold, so many hands. I'm the general manager for Manitoba Beef and Forage Initiatives. I see a few familiar faces, so I'll save you the whole rundown. But just as a reminder, MBFI exists to engage stakeholders in the beef and forage industry, as well as carry out on-farm evaluation and do extensions. So the work we do would not be possible without our partners with Manitoba Agriculture as a funder as well as a collaborator on events, but also with Ducks Unlimited and Manitoba Beef Producers and strategic funding through the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership. Today, what I'm going to share with you is a bit of the work we've been doing under the Smart Farm umbrella. And when we think of what is smart farming or precision farming, it really boils down to data or being able to do things remotely, collecting information that'll maybe help us understand, well, first and foremost, this is the biggest challenge, how do you get technologies to work remotely? So working with getting farm connectivity or evaluating, maybe I have internet at the shop, but can I get some of these sensors to work a mile out in pasture? So we've done some work with farm connectivity. There's lots of different technologies that monitor health or reproductive metrics. So this little ear tag is the eSense ear tag through Merck now that will give you health metrics. So we can also look at individual performance. So remote weighing, remote individual intake of mineral we've done some work with, understanding grazing behavior. There's all kinds of sensors to monitor the environment, and then also infrastructure or equipment. So today, like we see in the picture here, is this eShepherd virtual fencing. Who in the audience is already very familiar with the eShepherd or virtual fencing collars? A little bit? Okay, so I'm just gonna run through why are we talking about virtual fencing in Gladstone today. With our collars and deploying them, going back to 2024 was our first year using them. And really, virtual fencing is a tool. It's a fancy tool. It's a really slick way of training your cattle to move across different paddocks. But why bother with that? And it ultimately boils down to why would you consider rotational grazing? And that boils down to we want to rest our pastures. We want to introduce an ability for those grasses and forages to regrow after a grazing event. And ultimately that ties back to increasing our pasture productivity. So specifically, some of the challenges with rotational grazing is getting into areas where you can't put a cross fence. Maybe you have a really good perimeter fence, but it's too many wetlands, too much, maybe there's a gravel pit, maybe you have areas that you just can't get cross fence through. This is where virtual fencing comes in as a solution to just logistically add paddocks to an area that is perimeter fenced. It also has a business case for labor savings. So if you are already rotationally grazing, and if you think about you have to go out, set out your reels, walk that out, you do your setup, you do your moves, whether it's 3 days or daily or every few hours, the labor it takes you to physically put out that temp fence, move your cows, and set up the next piece. So the virtual fencing is positioned as a labor savings. Also, there is, depending on your threshold for risk, my threshold for risk is fairly low, so I'm always gonna want a good perimeter fence. But if you're looking at crop livestock integration and maybe you have an opportunity to do some aftermath grazing on some annual forages, or you can get on some cropped acres that haven't seen cattle in 30 years, theoretically, you could potentially use virtual fencing to just plop in and work your cattle within an area that isn't fenced. And then it does allow you remote watering. And then you can also do something that's kind of neat as passive sorting. So you can set up virtual fencing. So every single animal has a collar that's coded to that individual. you can assign animals to paddocks, and you can set up boundaries that can hold back individual animals. So maybe you set up a boundary, you let some pass through, and you hold back others. So theoretically, you could passively sort your cattle using these collars. But if we're thinking about, we want to introduce rotational grazing where we either logistically, physically, in terms of where we can put cross fence, or I don't have the time to drive an hour to get to that pasture to do daily or every 3 days. You know, I can only make it to that pasture once every 2 weeks or every week to check cows. There is this labor savings to ultimately our goal is to increase our pasture productivity. And when we think about if we have a pasture that's kind of getting a bit run down and we look at, well, how are we going to rejuvenate this pasture to be more resilient against drought or keep productivity going? No matter what practice you use to rejuvenate that pasture, whether it's ripping it all out, reseeding it, sod seeding, adding fertilizer, all of those interventions that we're familiar with do depend on a grazing management change, because unless we shift how we have been grazing it that got it into that degraded state, it's only that fertilizer is going to be good for a few years or maybe 2 or 3 years, and then you have to fertilize again. So if you really want to see a change in your overall pasture productivity, you do need to do an assessment of, is my grazing management a contributing factor to the decline of this pasture? And do I need to start thinking about changing my grazing rotation? Is this a tool that may or may not work for me? And so just to hammer in on the pasture rejuvenation through grazing. So at the Brookdale Farm, MBFI had a 6-year study led by a Manitoba Ag Extension Specialist, Pam Machesko. She had 90 acres that were in a rotational graze, side by side against 90 acres that was continuously grazed with 2 sets of 25 pairs. Over time, the continuous pasture got pretty worn down. And if we look at total yield, so we go out every July and we take clippings, so we get an estimate of how much forage there is at kind of peak productivity for a pasture. We've been doing this since 2016. In here, we have the different treatments that we started in 2022. And I just want to draw out this this dark blue bar here. So in 2022, we had paddocks that were plan grazed or rotationally grazed, and then we have paddocks that were continuously grazed. Starting in 2022, we implemented a new grazing rotation of either continuing on with plan grazing, take half, leave half, versus, you know, a total graze. So grazing it really heavy. We wanted to see how this previous 6 years of management would respond to a change in management. And really, the thing I want to point out is in 2022, under previous 6 years of continuous grazing, we had maybe 2,200 pounds of forage productivity. So that's pretty low compared to the side-by-side of over 4,000 pounds of productivity. And then same thing here with this other piece, like on the other planned pairing, we had over 5,000 pounds of productivity versus just under 3,000 pounds. So blue to blue, plan to continuous under both scenarios, dramatically less productivity. In 2022, we made a change. We stopped continuously grazing and we carved them up into paddocks and we started introducing rest. So either it was a take half, leave half, twice over rotation, or we grazed it really hard once. The 1 year response in yield, this orange bar, we can see in 2023 was a dry year, so we do have some interannual variability, but if we look at the jump in productivity in total biomass from 22 to 23 in a dry year, we gained over 1,000 pounds of productivity. In a wet year, we jumped up to almost 7,000 pounds. That's comparable to a barley green feed production under a previously pretty rundown piece. The only change we made, we didn't fertilize. The only thing we changed was our grazing practices. So whether it's cross fence or whether it's virtual fencing, the base premise of there is value in integrating rest into your grazing rotation. So getting into the technology of what are these virtual fencing collars? This is the collar. This is what's commercially available right now for you to buy. In a couple minutes, I'll show you some other options that aren't commercially available in Manitoba yet, but they should be coming. This unit right here is a solar panel. One challenge or drawback I personally see is that this is 6 pounds. So this can weigh pretty heavy on the cows. And like they will react to it, but they do kind of get a bit more desensitized. There's chain links on either side, and then their rubber piece here is a breakaway. So how does it work? It relies on cellular connectivity, so it has like a cell phone SIM card in these units, and it also relies on satellite GPS. So the cellular connection is kind of communicates the instructions, where the satellite data tells the collars where they are, or like where the cow is with respect to the instructions it's received from the cellular data. So you set up a program like everything. It's an app. It's an app on your laptop. It's an app on your phone. You sit down on your computer. You delineate what size of paddocks you're going to have, assign animals to them. That transmits those instructions from the internet, hangs out in the cloud, from the cell tower to the cow. The cow knows where it is based on satellite. So if you're in an area that has reasonable cell coverage and it's just LTE, it doesn't have to be 5G, it'll work pretty well. But if you have limited cell coverage, then you're gonna have to invest in an additional base station. So then you have an amplifier to go from cellular data to an amplifier that then this creates a region where the cows will have connectivity. So just don't laugh at my animation. Some of you guys may have already seen this animation, but how does it work? So here's my, super tough 5-strand barbed wire fence that no cow's ever gonna get out of. I have a watering source, and I'm gonna create, during this training period, it's really important, you're only challenging them against, so in my laptop, I'm gonna draw out a virtual line or a boundary, and they're gonna get trained against this line for at least 10 days, a couple weeks. As they approach that line, basically it's, It's 5 meters or 16 feet. So if this is, according to GPS, if this is the invisible line, as I'm a cow walking towards it, I get within 5 meters, an audio cue is gonna play for 5 seconds. The cow's gonna go, oh, what's that audio cue? And it's gonna keep walking, and then it's gonna get a pulse or a stimulation, a shock on those chain links. That's gonna, either they're gonna be, depending on the cow, they're not even gonna flinch, or they're gonna bolt. And if they go forward, if they continue going forward, nothing's gonna happen. When they come back, nothing's gonna happen. But when they come back to the rest of the cows, when they approach a line again, they'll hear an audio cue and then get a shock when they keep going. So basically what they learn is that I'm gonna turn around or back up when I hear an audio cue. So they're kind of, it's like walking in a dark room blindfolded. So you kind of don't know where the fence is, but you find it by hearing the audio cues and you navigate it, working your way around. This is just an animation. This is Brandon. Value Village is right there. Here's the baseball diamonds. This is 420 some acres of pasture that we run a group of 75 pairs on. And this is just a heat map of where they went through the rotation. So at First Street Pasture, these replicates they have the whole 30 or 40 acres. And then with these paired replicates is when they start getting into tighter daily moves. It's a comparison of the impact of rest interval, a little bit different. But as they start going through, you can see that, you can see some differential grazing behaviors. So the darker the color, or the brighter the color, so you start seeing an increase in coverage. So as we're moving through the daily moves, now we're getting really uniform coverage through those smaller paddocks. So we were doing little allocations, moving them every day just with the virtual fencing. And we had, I would say, 98 to 100% compliance with the training of the collars, and it worked really well. One of the challenges with us evaluating the collars is that we already had a cross-fenced paddock, so that 400 some acres was already divided into 10 paddocks. We already had the infrastructure in place. So we did the same thing again last year. It worked well again. This year, we're gonna be deploying the collars on on a new producer collaboration on some new land we got to the north of the Brookdale pasture, where it's 3/4 sections that don't have any cross fence. And we're going to be deploying those collars to see how well we can actually make those cows move where there is no visual fence there at all. Just a little bit about cow behavior. So this is all 75 cows, every single time an audio cue played and every single time they got a shock. So in the first couple of weeks, there's a tiny little blip where, yeah, we were getting a fair few shocks, but as they went through the training period, it really went down to 0. Even if we took a break from using the collars as they went through a different part of the rotation, they remembered and didn't have like a big uptick in getting shocked again. So if they heard the audio cue, they got shocked, they got trained, and then they remembered their training. One thing I think is interesting is this is every single cow that we had on the collars, so all 75 cows. The first bar is, there's a taller bar and a smaller bar. The first one is how many times an audio cue played, and then the smaller one is how many times they got shocked. And this is just, interesting is that this cow here, I think, is 77E, and so she did a lot of exploring. She was finding those audio cues everywhere, so she would be one of those cows that is always looking for the hole. And so she was getting a lot of audio cue plays, but not necessarily getting a crazy amount of pulses or electrical shocks. Whereas if we go to, let's see, 331J, she was maybe average in getting audio cues, but she was really good at getting shocked. So she maybe wasn't exploring as much, but if she heard the audio cue, she was still going to challenge that fence, which just is a piece of, we all know this, we have different cow behaviors. We have lead cows, we have followers. We have cows here that didn't really get very many audio cues and barely got any shock because they were just staying with the group. And so that's just another consideration when we're thinking about how this works in a diverse group of animals. So pairs, yeah. So the collars go on the cows, the calves are everywhere. So if you're on, our smallest subdivision was 30 acres, and we were dividing that into maybe an acre a day for 75 pairs for that tight moves. So the calves would be everywhere within that perimeter fence, but the cows had to move, so the calves had to come back to the cows. And they were everywhere. Josie was there.
Did you notice any difference? Was that 77's calf always further away from the herd?
I didn't see that. This data took a while to get from Gallagher, so to go back, I wouldn't be able to say for sure. But yeah. What did it cost us? So when we bought these in 2024, it was about $350 a collar. Assuming they last for 6 years, the first set of collars we got, they recalled them, and we got a new set of collars for 2025. So this is year 2 for that set of collars. Whether they actually last the 6 years will be part of our evaluation. So if we divide that by over 6 years, we get an annual cost per collar of $58. For 75 collars, it would cost us then just over $4,000. It also has an annual data charge of, we'll say for 5 months of we'll run it up to $14. So an annual fixed cost of about $1,000 for 75 pairs. Labor, assuming you're still gonna do weekly checks, you're still gonna, the time it takes you to sit at your computer, we would say maybe roughly 3 hours a week or so to do it with the virtual fencing, round that out to about $1,200. So we get an estimate of about maybe $6,000. To compare it to fencing, as an assumption, like permanent cross fencing, that was a bit trickier, but we're just setting up the North Pasture right now, and we're gonna use one of those mobile carts. So we're using the Pasture Pal from 7L. You could also use the Range Ward from Range Ward, which has the bigger reels and heavier cord. So you can bring in a portable unit and use that for your cross fencing. So I use that as a comparison because it's the same idea. You could bring in that solar fencing cart with all the reels, everything you need to fence, set it up temporarily and go with it. So to buy this unit right now was about, say, $1,200. By rates, it should last about 10 years. The frame is gonna last forever, but if we're thinking about the solar panels, the energizer, the inverter, so there's gonna be some annual maintenance costs, But for sure, the energizer would be your biggest cost, aside from the metal frame of the actual cart. We'll say 10 years is kind of an estimate. And then labor is going to be a lot higher if we're going out and doing it. If we're doing intentional grazing, we're going to say maybe 10 hours a week for our grazing management. So we're not too far off, but we're saving maybe $1,000 under this scenario. Every farming operation, how many hours you work in your rotational grazing is all going to depend. So this is just really kind of an estimate to put some numbers up to see, compare that against how you would do your fencing if you're looking at your cost per mile of your cross fences being 2-strand or 1-strand, high tensile, or if everything's temporary, will impact this. So some lessons learned from when we did it over the last couple of years is the fit of those collars is incredibly important. If they're too tight or if the neck starts getting bigger, you are going to have some pinch points and some stress rub marks on either the top of the neck or under the chin where the unit can rub against the chin. Too loose, it can swing around as well. And if you have high fly pressure, the cow is going to be fighting against that collar, swinging more, that is going to be potentially rubbing more. So during that training period, you need to watch the cows closely and how they're reacting to having the collars on and monitor them throughout the grazing season, because there's a rubber patch that if they get hooked on a fence or a tree, it'll break on that rubber, and then you can easily find the collar with GPS. But if the neck just keeps getting bigger, the collar will dig in, and then you can have fly strike, and it can get something you want to watch for. Manageable, not a deal breaker, but just a lesson learned. So just to kind of reiterate, obviously you have to have the connectivity. You need to think about what your operating cost and your infrastructure that you already have, and what is that added advantage of bringing the virtual fencing in. You can do irregular shapes, but you can't do tight angles, because if the angles are too tight, then those 6 meters are going to start bouncing off of each other, and the cows aren't going to know whether they're coming or going. That's a big important consideration on the watering points as well. They recommend having at least 30 to 50 feet buffer from where and put your invisible line or virtual line behind your watering point so that they can come to water, congregate around water without ever hearing any audio cues that might scare them off water. So how you set up where your watering points are you alleying them back? Are you setting up a central point or you're using some physical fence for their alleying from paddocks to the watering point, is all just in consideration when you're developing that grazing plan. And already mentioned that you need to have adequate training and monitoring for fit. And then right now, it is a limitation of only having one company that you can buy from. There is vents. So if you guys heard people from Saskatchewan talk about virtual fencing, they use the vent system. It has a tower where you put in a physical tower, and you can only really do the virtual fencing within reach of that tower, and it's more streamlined collars that have a lighter battery pull. That isn't necessarily something you could go and buy right now that I'm aware of. No Fence is from Norway. Researchers in Alberta have done some work with these, but we weren't able to commercially buy them. And then out of the States is a new product called Halter. As far as I'm aware right now, it's not commercially available, but any one of these three might be growing and expanding into this market as an option in the future. So with anything, with more competition comes better options. So just something to keep in mind. When we think about that value of one of the biggest values, or one of the values from virtual fencing, is that ability to remotely monitor. So you can actually see where a cow is and get a sense of, is something going on? Is she under predation pressure? Or is she hasn't gone to water for a day and a half? You can get some of that value from just a GPS ear tag. So you're monitoring where the animals are, but you're not necessarily, you can't control their movement, but you can know where they are. And so with GPS ear tags, a lot of the companies now are coming up with some pretty slick algorithms. So the data is longitude and latitude. This is where the cow is. That behavior of those points and how they're tracked can go into an algorithm, and all of a sudden you can get health alerts. Are they in heat? Have they crossed a boundary? And so you can know if your cows are out. Are they showing erratic behavior? Like, are they being pushed by predators? Are they not going to water? So you can set up alerts. So if you're kind of out of fence or lost, you can get health alerts. And then you can also see heat maps of your pasture utilization. And so for this summer, we're evaluating 2 different GPS ear tags. This is out of North Dakota that just got released. It's a more heavy duty unit. It's running, I think it's $175 an ear tag. The neat thing is that it comes paired with a smaller ear tag that is only $20 an ear tag. And so then you can have kind of the satellite-based bigger piece that kind of talks to these smaller ones. So you can have, you know, the more expensive ear tag in the cow, but then also put a smaller disposable one in your calves so you can get where the calves are going as well as the cows. The smart paddock, so this relies purely just on satellite. The smart paddock relies on a gateway. So again, you're setting up a tower, you need to have point-to-point Wi-Fi, and the ear tags, these are cheaper, so they're only maybe $70 an ear tag, but then you have to put up a tower, which is maybe $1,300 for the tower. So these are 2 different ways to do the same, 2 different ways to skin the same cat, if I can talk. And we'll be evaluating these over this summer. So I guess stay tuned on how those apps worked for us and kind of some of the pros and cons of the different ways of getting that data or that connectivity going. That's all I have. You can get a hold of us through our social media, or you can always track me down. Yeah.
When you talk about setting up these towers, how big a range does this cover?
Depends on how tall you go. So you have to figure out, that's talking with the company technician and going, okay, here's the legal land descriptions of where these cows are going to be. It doesn't have to necessarily cover corner to corner, but maybe it covers their watering point so it can get a data transfer when they're drinking, and maybe they go half a mile out from the watering point, but when they're coming back, you just need to get coverage so that you're getting a data transfer at least once a day. So it's sitting down with a technician, looking at the coverage maps, looking at where a congregating point is, and then what line of sight interference is it. So if it was open, you could have a shorter tower versus you have to get over some trees. So it really just depends. But your bubble of coverage is just how tall you go or how intense the tower needs to be. Question over here?
Will that tell you if the cow's open or not, or do you still have to get the vet?
I would still, personally, risk management, I would always still have a vet come, but theoretically, it's all activity. So if it's running around and mounting, it's gonna have a higher activity that is associated by the algorithm to indicate being open. And so by rights, it may tell you which ones you have a question mark on. It may also help you if cows slip, like maybe you preg check in November, and then all of a sudden you're seeing behavior happening in February that maybe you don't need to be waiting for that cow because her activity is indicating to the all-powerful algorithm that she's actually open or cycling. One caveat on the algorithms, and this comes with as things become more commercially available, it's constantly improving, the more data validation. But one of the biggest challenges with validating heats is that the data is their body temperature with some of the units, not with the GPS ear tags, it's just their activity. But temperature and activity, you can see patterns in it, but to actually validate, is that heifer or cow cycling? So that's a visual, like riding or mounting behavior. So getting those validation points are really tough for researchers because you basically have to sit and watch your cows and go, or put patches on their tail heads and go, yeah, no, she actually had heat. So to have those true validation points to correct the algorithm is a challenge for research right now. But yeah, any other questions? Yeah.
A couple of questions. Have you guys used the collars in the wintertime or just on summer?
We have not. Mostly because of that buffer area, so that 6 or 8 meters. When we do bale grazing, we want to run them tighter than that. So we have not put them on through winter. Theoretically, that 6 pounds of battery and solar should work through winter. but I was a bit hesitant with the chain link and with, our bill, how we were doing our winter grazing, it just wasn't a fit, but that could be an option. Maybe if we were swath grazing. I know Obi Daruna at Lakeland used the no fence ones on steers, and they worked really well swath grazing. Because then you can have that fuzzy line between, where the audio cue is and where the shock line is. Yeah.
Okay. And other question: the Gallaghers are $350 on a 6-year return plan. Is that what it was?
That's my basic math. I don't know what the price is right now. That's what I paid for them in 2024. I'm sure it's more now.
Well, I was just
Yeah.
watching a guy on YouTube down in South Dakota. I can't recall the brand, whether it was Halter or something like that, but it was an annual lease on the collars.
That's Halter. Yeah.
So then they're actually replacing the collars every year if the technology is
Yep.
improving too, right? So,
And so that can be attractive, but then you're committing to that capital. So no matter what, we're paying the $14 a year per head for data charges. So the data connectivity is going to be a fixed cost. But whether you own the collars and hope they last for 6 years, that's pretty kind of forgiving on my end. Maybe it's only 3 years. But with Halter, then you're just leasing them. So you can take as many, get it, and maybe you don't like it and you don't have to, then you just give them back. But it's a higher annual cost in leasing them. So it's just balancing that out. So I think it would be really exciting to see that model come up into Canada, so that just more competition anytime when you have a commercially available product, more market competition is better, I think. But yeah. Thank you so much, you guys. Oh, yeah?
Do you think that over a period of time, if you kept using these collars on the same group of cattle, that you could get to the point where you'd only need collars, say, on 50% of them? That they would stay as a herd group move?
It depends on your risk threshold. So the individual cow data would tell you there are some cows that stayed with the group. They weren't challenging. And just like calves, they might stay with the group. And again, it's that our goal is to introduce rest. So if you're moving the whole mob and you're getting them off that, 30 or 20 acres and moving them on, or maybe it's by the quarter section, depending on how you graze, if you're moving them away, even if you have a couple stragglers, it's not that full intensity of that whole cow group hankering down, continually eating their preferential grasses or forbs over and over. Like, it grows 5 days, it's nipped again. Like, anytime you can introduce rest, you're getting ahead on your forage management. Whether you know your cows well enough to know which ones are the hanger outers and which ones are your 77Es would just depend down to your own husbandry. Yeah.
How fast are you getting the information back from Gallagher, like the algorithms and things like that?
All of it is instant, like you can see it in real time. To get the data download, like the raw data from them, is a bit of a process that we have to pay for. So we're actually paying them to get that data to create that graph. But you can, in real time, see where they are and what they're doing, either on your phone. So I personally, for our staff, they would probably do the paddock allocation, like creating the virtual paddocks and the assigning of animals on a laptop. But then you can toggle, like do a move, and you can set up moves in advance so that you can actually it just happens, like setting things in the calendar. But you can monitor on your phone pretty easily. Yeah. And that goes for both the ear tags as well. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
I'm just going to add to that guy from South Dakota, he was also, I forget what you called it, but he was using it for calving, and some cows were assigned to a paddock over here and then the rest over here. So then when they calve, usually they go off by themselves, slip into that pasture, and then he'd be able to see it on his phone and say, oh, maybe she had a calf, and he just drives right out to that, knows right where the cow is in that other paddock. And
No, absolutely. And so that's that passive sorting. So how you assign animals to different kind of virtual paddocks, and as long as you have an overlap, and then you can just let them passively move over and then not let them move back. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. you.